Hello everyone. Today in Analyzing Everyone, we open our case on not just one, but on two very different characters in the movie Se7en, David Mills and William Somerset, played by Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. So I won't wait any longer and let's start our third episode of Analyzing Everyone. Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt play two very different roles in this amazing movie. Saying that they are quite the opposite of each other would be an understatement. These perfectly invented and thought of characters fit almost wonderful in the world they are put within. But before we investigate David Mills and William Somerset from a closer distance, I will explain how I will tell the story of these two colleagues that don't even know each other for more than a fortnight. Because not everyone has seen the movie, I will recap the whole story very briefly. And because we can call this movie an old movie, maybe I will fresh things up for the many who did see this movie anyways. David Mills is a very sloppy person with an impulsive characteristic mind. On the other hand, Somerset is very well organized, has a clear morning routine and thinks a lot before he goes over into taking action. So in the second part of this video, we will go and take a deeper look into the many differences that make these two characters so pleasant to watch working together. There are many more completely different personal characteristics between these two detectives that are just too interested to miss out on. At the end of the video, there will be another part where I talk about my conspiracy theory of the loneliness of William Somerset that you just don't want to miss out on. So just keep on sticking around till the very last second and enjoy this third part of Analyzing Everyone. Taking place in a nameless city, Se7en follows the story of two homicide detectives tracking down a sadistic serial killer named John Doe, who chooses his victims according to the 7 deadly sins. These 7 sins are lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy and pride. Dave Mills is a hopeful but naive rookie who finds himself partnered with veteran detective William Somerset. Together they have to trace the killer step by step, as John Doe always seems one step ahead of the two detectives. Mills and Somerset witness the aftermath of John Doe's horrific crimes one by one as the victims pile up in rapid succession. All the while moving closer to a gruesome fate neither of them could have predicted, involving David Mills' wife, who has been the serial killer's last victim. John Doe chooses David Mills' wife and not some family member of Somerset because of how these two individual detectives are very different. This is really important throughout the whole story, so let's investigate these differences. I will jump back and forth in the story to tell all these differences between Mills and Somerset in the best possible way to fully understand why these characters are so perfectly defined and so important for how great this movie has turned out. The film starts by David Mills entering an apartment where Somerset is investigating. Somerset, who isn't really impressed by David Mills' appearance, walks easily through the large populated sidewalks, while David is struggling to walk beside Somerset because he's a new guy in the big city. The two detectives are in almost every aspect totally different, as you can see it already begins on the sidewalk. You can not only see Somerset almost gliding through the pedestrians as if he is smooth as butter, but you can also hear the difference between the two while they speak. Somerset can't find a reason why David Mills wants to be in this overly violated city, as Somerset just wants to retire from his job and work on a farm far away from this city. There are so many differences between these two colleagues, and it is shown in almost every situation they get into. David is more impulsive, he is sloppy, easily distracted, can't comprehend his emotions, and from a totally different perspective, David loves beer, is a young guy and has a wife. On the other hand, Somerset is way calmer. He thinks before he takes action, stays focused on his job, and has his emotions in control. Somerset is also a wine guy, almost retired and thus old. He has no wife or girlfriend. And more about my theory, why Somerset doesn't have a girlfriend, later on. These two characters are so different that I even consider them having a different skin color is a decision made on purpose. The first time David and William agree with each other is when the police thinks they have found the killer and start a search. They both know that the man they are looking for
seems to have more purpose.
When they sit in a car, they talk about instances when they had to pull their gun. Somerset says he only has drawn his weapon 3 times in his 34 years being a homicide detective, while Mills says he already has drawn his gun once, but the difference is Mills is still very young. Later in the movie, you will notice how fast Mills will draw his gun and shoot at John Doe. Somerset does not grab his gun, but instead seeks cover on the floor. This is not only because Somerset does not grab his gun that fast, but also because he thinks about the situation. Somerset needs to be 100% sure in his mind will he pull his gun. Somerset thinks a lot. He thinks and asks more than he concludes, and that is exactly the reason why his morning routine is so important for him. Because of this overly clear routine of getting out of bed, making the bed, getting his pencil, badge and glasses off the corner of his nightstand, and eventually picking up his perfectly ironed blazer from his bed to start the day with a clear mind. David, on the other hand, is quite the other way around. He wakes up way too late for an organized morning routine. When waking up in his wife's arms, he puts on a wrinkled shirt. He doesn't care about the way his tie with a basketball print hangs around his neck and drinks from a cup that's probably over a day old. When David wants to go to work, his wife has to pick the crust around his eyes because David did not see and did not care about it. There's only one other instance where we see them sleeping, and that's when they have to wait in an alleyway. They both sleep on the same leather sofa. David sleeps in a way that's most comfortable for him, while Somerset only slides a bit down. He still sleeps in a polite way. After they wake up, David has planted his face against Somerset's shoulder while his jacket is all wrinkled again, laying on his lap. Mills is full of himself and asks Somerset.
You've seen my files, right? You've seen the things I've done.
Somerset reacts by saying,
Nope.
You can really see Somerset not caring a single moment about what Mills has done, because this is a different city where it doesn't matter where you came from or what you have done. At least that is what Somerset wants you to believe. Later in this video, you will hear more about why Somerset doesn't actually think this way. Another great example in the way they do their work. Somerset is focused and gets his clues and information from reading, thinking, visits to the library, and well thought of questions he asks. David Mills gets the information he wants by being reckless in some cases. He has a way more practical mind than Somerset. Give Mills an important book and he will read it, but David Mills will never open a book by himself. He gets his information by drawn conclusions his impulsive and inexperienced mind comes up with. He will almost never hear Somerset say something impulsive. He will never react on his emotions, but he rather thinks about what he will say or ask. Mills not having his emotions in control will play a major role later in the story. Remember that this is a huge weak point for Mills. One instance of a gathering of these differences is when Somerset gets invited by David's wife for dinner. The first difference is seen when they talk about the city. David likes the city and bought their house after a tour of just 5 minutes, which is a very impulsive thing to do. Somerset says he hates the city because he thinks a lot about how the city really is. After dinner, they work on the case for a while. David can't concentrate on the case for too long and asks Somerset for another beer. Because David only drinks beer as an alcoholic drink, Somerset, who is way more focused on the case and searching for details instead, asks for wine. Later, he will get his wine in a lemonade glass, because David just quickly grabbed a glass and isn't fancy enough to get Somerset a wine glass. Not much later, David will pick up a random basketball on the ground and tell Somerset he has to go to sleep, all because he can't focus for too long on papers or books. He's way more practical. In this whole scene, we see impulsive behavior versus calculated behavior, unfocused versus focus, knowledge of a rookie versus the knowledge of a senior, young versus old, and beer versus wine. David resembles some sort of frat guy, and Somerset is the wise elder person that seems to know much more than anyone else. After the interrogation of the murder associated with the dead sin lust, you see the two detectives through a window frame. These two rooms resemble their differences. Somerset's room is clean. He sits straight up on the desk, looking straight forward, and thinks about the following steps they could make with the information they have extracted from the interrogation. Somerset is a thinker and thus open-minded and positive after an interrogation where they didn't get the information they hoped they would get. David, on the other hand, is someone who gets his information from actions, impulsive behavior, drawing conclusions, and not from thinking about their next steps if they don't have any information. You see him sitting down in a close position. He looks to the ground, a sign that David doesn't see a future in their case. The room is messy, his cup has fallen over, and some other props are seen laying in a messy manner as well, characterizing David's actions, thinking and way of living. David also has a very different weak point than Somerset. David reacts with anger and disbelief if he gets emotionally aroused. Earlier I said something about the reason why David's wife is killed and not someone important from Somerset's side. It's because of the differences in David and Somerset, their weak points. After John Doe pretends to be from the press and takes a picture of David, he sees how David emotionally reacts when someone does something David does not like. John Doe noticed David Mills' emotional reaction. Somerset even mentioned that David can't control his emotions and thus can't control his weak point. Because of this particular instance, John Doe knows who Detective Mills is and that he is easily triggered by his emotions. When John Doe is taken to a place where the last two bodies are supposed to be, he already triggers David's nerves by saying certain things. John Doe gets exactly the reaction he wants to get. At the end, John Doe tells him about the murder he committed on David's wife, and with the exact right word choice. He drives David crazy. David can't fight against his emotions and reacts like only an impulsive and angry person will do, and shoots John Doe in his head, exactly what he wanted to happen. John Doe wins over the emotions of David Mills. Back to my theory about Somerset not having a woman in his life anymore. Somerset tells Tracy that he was close of having a child with his girlfriend back then. He also tells us in another instance that he was almost married with that same person. The difference between Somerset and Mills is that Mills has a wife and Somerset does not have one. I think that after the story ends, Mills and Somerset have one thing in common. They both lost their wife or girlfriend. I think this because of the way Somerset talks about his wife. He never says something bad about her and mostly talks in a sad or sorrowful way about his former girlfriend. We also get to know that she was pregnant, but that Somerset persuaded her and she got rid of the baby. Somerset knows he made the right call by getting rid of the baby in the womb of his girlfriend, but he also thinks about it every day. I think Somerset's girlfriend died. How she died we don't know, but it must have been in an accident or some disease she couldn't overcome. That is also why Somerset thinks about his daughter or son every day, because there is no chance anymore of getting his girlfriend back. His girlfriend won't live another life in the soul of his son or daughter. Mills' weak point is reacting with anger on his emotions, but what about Somerset? What is his weak point? Somerset gets confronted by Mills in a local bar. Mills thinks that Somerset only talks bad about the city because he almost retires from being a detective. Somerset wants to live and work on a far away from the city that is overflown with violence. But in reality, it's the other way around. He wants to live in the city because he can't go without the city. Somerset's weak point is that he thinks he knows what he wants, but he actually doesn't. This is also reflected back on the abortion of his child. I think he regrets the abortion, but because Somerset made a choice back then, he sticks to the idea that he made the right call. Confronting him with this breaks a pattern in his life. Now that Mills confronted him that he wants to be a detective and that he wants to live in the city, Somerset doesn't seem to have a purpose after his job. This leaves him sleepless that night. He breaks his metronome and has a long-lasting gaze, where he realizes the things Mills has said to him. The metronome Somerset throws off his nightstand could have been seen as a metaphor for his last seconds as a working man, almost finished with the job of being a detective for 34 years. Breaking the metronome means that he changed his mind. The next day, he talks about not leaving his department till the case is finished, and after the job is finished, he tells a fellow policeman that he will be around and won't leave the city to go work on a farm or something like that. So that leaves us at our last conclusions. Who are David Mills and William Somerset? David Mills is a rookie detective searching for action in a big city. He's very impulsive when it comes to making decisions. He really likes to conclude things before he could actually know those things. David is a white and young male, having a wife and a few dogs he sees as his children. Detective Mills is really sloppy when it comes to organizing his appearance. He is often seen in wrinkled clothes. He will pull his gun relatively fast and he is more of a beer person than a wine guy. Somerset is the opposite of the young detective. William Somerset is very organized in everything he does. He needs to know things before he will go over into taking action. This is also why he asks himself and the person he speaks to more questions than conclusions. Somerset is an elder person with a lot of experience. He likes to read and he finds it important to have a clear morning routine. Somerset probably lost his girlfriend some time ago, and this is also one of the reasons why he can cope with his emotions so well, because he has lost someone really important in his life. On the other hand, Somerset is a wise man, learning everything he knows from reading. He drinks wine, and when it comes to pulling a gun on an enemy, he will often wait till he is 100% sure. These two characters can be seen different in many ways. Here's a list of many of these different characteristics. Organized versus messy, slow versus fast, impulsive versus thoughtfulness, black versus white, concluding versus asking questions, wife versus alone, young versus old, wanting to be in the city versus wanting to leave the city, practical versus theoretical, wine versus beer, emotions versus emotionless, rookie versus veteran. And with that said, this was the third episode of Analyzing Everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you want to see more, and leave a comment on who I should do next. I will see you in the fourth episode of Analyzing Everyone. Have a nice day.
Where you gonna be? Around. I'll be around.